Café with Cavanha and Ecoa PUC Rio bring the topic the unstable supply chain with professors Dale Rogers, Arizona State University, Zachary Rogers, Colorado State University, Stephen Carnovale, Rochester Institute of Technology, Cesar Lavalle, Logistics and Supply Chain Institute. Thank you for accepting this café. Good morning, professors.
Morning.
Morning.
Thank you.
Looking to the supply chain downstream, individual consumers and the upstream manufacturers and raw materials, which categories are more suitable to the shortage case and why they have shortage? Zach?
Yeah, so there's quite a few actually. So the first place we're really seeing, it's really a tale of two different supply chains in many ways. And sort of what we're seeing is there's the sort of day-to-day stuff where we are short on a lot of things. We're cooking more at home. There's low on food and meat in some grocery stores, partly because we're losing processing capability. Like around my house, they said all of the Wendy's, which is a popular restaurant here, they're not going to have cheeseburgers anymore, which is crazy to me. And it's partly because we have this huge demand for some pieces of the economy. And then there's other pieces where we have no demand. So apparel, furniture, electronics, all of these things are just stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. And if you look at the most recent Logistics Managers Index report, which Dale and Stephen and I released on Tuesday, it really shows that transportation is way down. And that's because we're not moving goods forward in the supply chain the way we normally would. But at the same time, warehousing is way up because we're storing all of these goods. And so we sort of pushed all these things forward to maybe the step before or two steps before the consumer, and now it's just stuck. And so there's big pieces of industry that we're all inventoried up and we have nowhere to go. We have all this goods, and it's just sitting in the supply chain right now, hopefully not expiring, hopefully not going bad before we can get it to the consumer.
Well, and as Zach says, Cavanha, so the retail stores shut down. A lot of stuff was already on the water coming to the U.S., although because of China being shut down earlier, some of that was slowed down. So there's no place for it to go. So, I'm involved in that Airbnb kind of warehousing company, Flex. You don't have it in Brazil, but in the U.S., FLEXE, there's Carl Seabrook and Flex. They're busier than they've ever been because there's so many names that you would recognize that are looking for extra warehousing space because either they want to get stuff out of their primary warehouses so that they can just flow the very fast-moving consumer goods, food and health and beauty aids and all that kind of stuff, or they are or another online retailer or brand owner, stuff isn't selling, like apparel and shoes and so on, and all the retail outlets are down. So it's a really interesting thing. Some products are doing extremely well, anything to do with food or consumables. Other stuff is being postponed. We added another 3.2 million new unemployment claims. I think we're at 33 million or 30 million. And just in the last, 5 weeks, I guess it would be. And so, in end of January, there were 130 million people working in the U.S., and now there's more than 30 million less. And so there's a lot of purchases that were happening because of the hot consumer economy before that aren't going to happen for a while. So it's a really tough thing, and there's sort of a wave that really moves through the global economy. Bangladesh, for example, is a basket case right now. How come? Well, their economy is built on making apparel, sewing apparel for the more developed world, Europe and the US and so on. Apparel orders have been canceled almost, 90% of them have been canceled, and people are starving in Bangladesh. So this thing is going to ripple through, and the waves are much larger than the 2008, 2009 recession. This is much worse.
Good. Stephen, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect dovetail from what Dale was saying, and the thing that I've been toying with in my head lately, and some colleagues of mine and I are actually working on research to answer one very simple question: what's the next product? And so there's a couple different ways that we've been thinking about it, because our people who study the consumer behavior and marketing, they have a pretty good idea of what drives people to buy certain products. So I'll give you a great example. If you're at a supermarket, right, and you go down the aisle and you weren't intending to buy toilet paper necessarily, but you see that there's a shortage or that people have multiple packages in their cart, you're going to grab one. Or you could be going down the dry goods aisle and you see somebody that has rice. Let's say you don't even eat rice. You're going to throw one in your cart. And so what happens? This happens at every single retail store across at least the United States, and I'm certain Cesar is going to tell us about what it's like in Brazil, but it happens at many retailers across the United States, and it causes this cracking effect, and it ripples throughout different parts of the supply chain. So what's next? Well, I've been thinking about it in terms of the progression that we've seen to date. So what have we seen? We've seen a basic, toilet paper and rubbing alcohol and then hand sanitizer. And then what's the next stage? Well, then it's dry goods. Then it's things that I could put in my cupboard and have them sit there until the next pandemic comes and go, oh boy, I've got that can of tomatoes from, so then there's that. And then what's the next thing? Well, then it's okay, now that I've got my base so I can take care of my health, now I've got some basic food to eat, maybe now I should get some meat. And now people are going to start dehydrating meat and storing it. And, and so it's cascading. So the real question is, what are the characteristics of products that drive the stockpiling behavior? And to answer your question, how do I think it's going to impact upstream? And I've been saying this, since I've been studying it, these are networks, they're not chains. And so the interconnectedness is going to ripple across the industry. I hadn't even considered the point that Dale mentioned about Bangladesh, and it's a fascinating one. Because what do you do when you have kind of demand that you put on pause for apparel? The same thing happens for electronics. And, so these are the things, and I'm trying to look at the behavior and understand what's the next product, and then, why is that the next product? That's kind of my.
I know it's Cesar's turn to talk, but let me just say one more thing. So, Bangladesh isn't like the only thing. There's a bunch of these. So, for instance, in the U.S., commercial real estate guys, and I suppose, we don't necessarily feel too bad for them, guys like Donald Trump and so on, commercial real estate guys. But, a lot of retail space before the virus was going for maybe $45 a square foot in good markets. And now pretty much all of the retailers, the big retailers for sure, are not paying their rent. They've said, we're not going to pay for a while. Okay, well, they can, the commercial real estate guys can probably deal with a few months of not getting paid. But then coming out of this, a bunch of the retailers will be gone. Established chains may move down to fewer stores because of what's happened here. And smaller retailers are totally threatened. So when they come out of this, the rents are maybe going to be something like $20 a square foot versus $45 a square foot. And then that ripples through the economy in other ways. So, in the recovery from the recession in 2008, 2009, the recovery was more deadly in many ways to businesses, to faculty positions at the University of Nevada, than the actual recession was. Because, you know, we can sort of make it through the tough part, but then you're kind of teetering, and the demand, the comeback demand, just isn't strong enough. In the house we had in Spanish Springs, Nevada, that Zach largely grew up in, you know, in our neighborhood, there was about 200 houses that went into bankruptcy in that recession, and a lot of it happened in late 2009, 2010, instead of just the 2008, 2009. So there's going to be, you know, you destroy this much wealth, this much capital in such a short period of time. The climb out is not the same angle as the destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Cesar, in Brazil is similar to this situation of the U.S. states, no?
I think we are more rational because we don't see that piling up. We don't see that much of a stock out. Maybe the first week. So what happened is the e-commerce side that increased a lot, and maybe some like Zona Sul. You remember there? Go through their website. It can take about 10 days for you to get it. But if you call them 8 o'clock in the morning, you get it the same day. The small mini markets, they are all having, they are all in a week or so, they had the website and they are doing so fine. So I have no trouble to get things in a couple of days or the same days. Talk about the durable goods, yes, there is a huge drop in demand. I have some numbers here. Like automotive has idle capacity of over 85%. Apparel, over 80%. Overall, 60%. So shortage, you may have it in some drugs, vitamins, that like supplement, people just start, you know, getting some fake news that if you had some stuff, you can get immune and stuff. The alcohol gel, for sure, masks. Those are the items that maybe now the alcohol is not, it's not that bad anymore. But for the mask stuff, yes. But they keep teaching on TV how to do your own mask. So you have to, most of the towns now, you have to wear them. Actually, I don't, because I haven't been out for the last, 7 weeks or so.
Oh, you haven't?
Nah, I'm okay. You know that there. But, you know, so I think we don't, as Steven said, no, the waves of piling up. I don't see that behavior here. What happened in terms of real estate? Amazing how creative Brazilians are. Lots of the stores in the malls, they became mini distribution center. And the guys that sells in the traditional store, they became like a agent calling people, and so and they are doing using self-storage as a distribution in the high density places. Crowd sourcing is booming, so it's amazing. It's like there's a very popular marketplace, one of the biggest one, Magalu. They used to have 15,000 sellers. In a couple of weeks, now they have 30,000. So they are all plugging in small business. very fast.
But Cesar,
Overall, the demand is lower because, well, in Brazil, traditionally, the e-commerce is at 5%. Maybe it's double. So companies are losing money, but they are kind of surviving somehow and adapting very fast in this kind of home office, online.
adapting very
Kind
fast.
of,
But Cesar, tell me, maybe the difference in terms of proportion, numbers. The United States has a very big number of contamination, and the impact is huge. It's not the same case in Brazil yet. We are growing very fast.
I'm sorry.
Maybe in 2 or 3 months we
Yesterday,
have the same problem, no?
actually, I just read yesterday the news that Brazil is becoming, the next few days, the epidemic center. So we are taking over the US place. But it's in a couple of days.
So we need to make another cafe, and you will change your speech because it's exactly the opposite.
No, the thing is that no, in Brazil, you have this like the wealth is not well distributed. So what happened? The first wave of the virus wave came by plane and from the cruise, right? So it came to first to Ipanema, to the nicer place, and somehow those guys can protect themselves. I can see lots of apartments closed down. They went to the rural place, like hiding somewhere. Nowadays, right now, the contamination is in the poor area, like favelas, and the speed of contamination is huge.
They grow very, very fast.
Yesterday was the record, over 600.
Yeah.
So it's going to double in a couple of days, and then a couple. So I'm sorry to say that we don't have good news.
Stephen, please, in terms of raw materials and manufactured plants, could you bring again the terms that you mentioned before?
Yeah, as you were talking, and as Cesar was talking about the decrease in capacity, it's really interesting because I hear a lot of people talking about, oh, can't we just shift capacity from A to B? But in a lot of cases, we can't. In many cases, we can't. And here's a great example of a raw material that probably is the most fungible, the most easily transitionable of maybe any of them, and it's milk. So there's a great story that came out, I think it could have been a month ago. Time has no meaning during the quarantine, but at a certain period of time ago, the story came out, and it talked about how dairy farmers had to dump a ton of milk. And the reason why was when in the US, when the schools shut down, what's very common is these tiny little containers of milk. And all the milk producers were setting up, and or at least the packaging plants had equipment set up to fill these small little containers. It couldn't be more than half a pint or something like that, 8 ounces, I don't know. And they couldn't retool in time to shift their capacity, which now ostensibly they had tons of, to gallons, half gallons, and things like that. You know, another great example of raw materials. I mean, the best raw material that we have is capacity right now, in some sense. Maybe it's an indirect raw material, but it's not shiftable. You know, retooling takes time. GM, it was going to take them when they, in the United States, got hit with the Defense Production Act, and then President Trump said you have to start producing ventilators. I think the lead time just to retool, to coordinate the raw materials on the sourcing side of things, which now we have to shift from a largely global supply chain to shift at least regionally to the largest degree possible, because many areas are shut down as well, right? So they're producing. So that's the ripple effect, and that's how it's going to propagate. So, or at least how the impact is going to come upward. And you know, it's the one thing that I hear that kind of bugs me is people talk about, we have all this capacity, can't we just shift it? Well, it's not as easy as saying, you know, it's not money. It's not that fungible, because things are, capacity is dialed in and tooled for a specific purpose. And so going from cars to ventilators, I mean, change over time from car to car can take, you know, 10 days, let alone going from car to ventilator. So, and that's the one thing. And then I think Dale made a point earlier, which was an interesting one, about when this happened, many raw materials, or at least work in process inventory, were already on boats. And so now are they stuck at ports and this and that. And so, yeah, I think this is just my gut feeling. I think you're going to start to see, and I could be totally wrong. It happens literally more than it doesn't. But I think you're going to start to see regional supply chain strengthen. So I think, for example, in the U.S., to a large degree possible, if people and manufacturers remember the impact that COVID had, we're going to start taking advantage of North American supply chains. Things that we can control a little bit easier than we can with a month, lead time from China, or whatever the case.
Well, and the other piece of what you just said, Stephen, is about shifting capacity, is sometimes you can't add that transportation cost because a lot of these are low margin items.
Yep.
So you think about something like agriculture, for instance. So it's not just milk; they're cutting up, peppers and squash and euthanizing chickens before we can, kind of slaughter them and stuff. Why is that? So, for instance, there's our good JBS, our good Brazilian friends at JBS. They have a meat packing plant right down the street from my house, and that one was closed down for a couple days. And so there was talk about, well, we might have to get rid of some cows and stuff like that. And the question was, well, there's in the next state over, there's 2 plants. Why can't we just move them? And the answer is that because things like that are so low margin, that if you add on an additional $1,000 or $500 per cow or whatever it's going to be to ship it over 2 states, now that margin has totally disappeared. And so many of these supply chains are so tightly and exquisitely arranged. It's sort of like a clock. A clock works when all of the gears are kind of moving together. If you just take one of the little gears out of the clock, the whole thing breaks. And that's how we're seeing with a lot of supply chains, is they're so exact that even when just one node or one link fails, the whole network, because it's like Stephen said, it's a network, the whole network collapses. And so I think that even, these little pieces, it doesn't matter that much about, okay, are we going to have an issue here, an issue here? Because if you just take one piece out, it's like, taking one card out of the house of cards. I mean, the whole thing can fall down because it's so interconnected.
I was thinking about what Cesar was saying, which is you haven't seen that many shortages in Brazil. One of the things that, riding on a bus with Cesar some years ago, we usually do it every summer, but this summer we don't get to, I guess. But Cesar, we were talking about China and so on, and Cesar said, in Brazil we have our own China, and what you meant was, there's places, Manaus, so on, where the costs are so low that, and also the costs of importing into Brazil are so high, that you're very competitive from a labor cost, total cost. In the U.S., we don't have that, and I don't think we're going to reshore much into the U.S. I know a lot of electronics companies are looking to build redundancy into their supply networks, but it's unlikely much of that will be in the U.S. because the costs are just too high. Years ago, I was
in Mexico, though.
That's what I
You can see some in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right.
You might see some in Mexico.
Regional.
Still,
exactly.
Mexico is, what's the cost in, let's say, apparel? What's the cost in Mexico versus the cost in Bangladesh?
Oh, well, yeah.
The landed costs out of Bangladesh are so much lower than Mexico. Now, the thing is, though, do you need to hedge? Do you need diversity?
Right.
And it could be that's what Mexico has. I don't think, there's a lot of people that think that manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. and
But
I
Dale,
think that's unlikely.
please let me add something in your thought. Very interesting. But at the same time, when we have shortages of masks, ventilators, or some critical equipment that the society needs this equipment. So is it possible to think in different way, not only in the price market driven, but in a strategic view of local content for every country, of course, thinking in a different way to protect society in a couple of equipment, or it's not the
Well, yeah, no, I think so. But what are those strategic commodities? So we already have that, Cavanha, in airplanes that could blow up your house. I mean, though, military stuff, that's already, we consider that strategic. And so that's manufactured here and it's very expensive and so on. But what are the commodities we should have? And maybe you could have forecasted that there was going to be some respiratory-based pandemic, and so you need ventilators. I mean, we would know that for next time. But do we need heart monitors? Do we need? I don't know what the thing is we would need. So maybe we could get a list of 100 things, maybe, and say, okay, these are strategic. So we've got to have capacity here. One of the things that's irritating to me about the way we've handled the crisis here in the U.S., we've spent, how many $1 trillion have we spent? Is it $3 trillion now?
We're close to 3, yeah, not over.
So $3 trillion, and we can't figure out, with spending $3 trillion and destroying so much of the economy, we can't figure out how to get testing equipment. We could take just a little bit of one of those trillions and we could add tests, for everybody all around. We could add a pile of them. We probably would have had a pile of them at my house. So how did we screw this up? So I think there does need to be a rethinking of how we do this. And truthfully, building in a quick response model, as we've learned over the last 40 years in supply chain, building a quick response model is much better than just building inventories.
Alert from Google Chrome.
And I think that I think that the administration and the federal government in the U.S. has really handled this incompetently. Because given all the money that's being spent, there's no way that we shouldn't have had all the stuff we needed. Even if we had to pay triple, you could have stood up several manufacturing plants temporarily in the U.S. and started rolling. Certainly on the testing side, ventilators are more complex. We've got enough machines to process the testing. We don't have enough of the supplies to do it. And if you're spending $3 trillion, you probably could have figured out how to make that happen.
Which variables to be considered to see which is strategic or not strategic?
Consumable.
Well,
I don't know what we would make in terms of, I don't know what we would have in terms of strategic items getting ready for whatever the next thing is, a hurricane or a locust or whatever it is.
Well, and you know what, too? The interesting thing about that is if you put yourself in the position of an actuary, they think about probability, impact, and then the expectation of those two combined, right? So if the likelihood is exceptionally low of whatever we're talking about, pick a problem. You take the likelihood of that happening, you multiply it by the impact financially it could have, or at least how much it would cost, and then you're looking at your expectation of risk. And so then there's not only there's the expectation of risk in terms of finances, well, there's the contingencies, which is why we have protectionism on certain products in the U.S. in military, aircraft, etc. But that's the thing, and it's like it's binary at a certain point. If it happens, then you hedged correctly. If it doesn't happen, then they're going to scream at you for spending all this money on something that could have been used elsewhere.
Yeah, Cesar, in Brazil, we have the trend to think more in terms of protecting the market, local market. We have local content figures sometimes. What you see in this local content?
Well, when I hear you, I was hearing Dave saying about maybe some of this stuff you have to build some more capacity. But think about it. The next pandemic probably is going to take another 100 years. So who is going to invest in a mask plant that's going to be idle? What I think there should be another way of looking at this. It's like redesigning. Maybe you can have in the textile industry some inbuilt way of turning into different products. You know what I mean? So maybe the government can help in giving some subsidies or so this setup can be fast. So because it's a textile stuff, no? And for the same for the respirator, I mean, if you just build a huge plant, it's going to be idle for another 100 years. So why don't have some parts manufacturing that can be flexible enough to set up in a faster way, a responsive way. So I think it's about a reconfiguration, because I don't think that piling up is going to work. Who's going to pay for that? And we talked the other day about being more distributed, decentralized, and smaller plants closer to the consumer market. That means that we're going to need more technology because it'll be more complex. But I think the technology is there, and of course, it's not for all the sectors. But I think that it's not about decreasing globalization, but it's about revisiting the designing of it. So you have resiliency and inbuilt some resiliency,
But Cesar,
contingency. So I think that's the approach.
but Cesar, it's not a state problem; it's a market problem. How market can drive this reconfiguration?
You know what? From what I've been hearing, that setup cost is getting lower and lower and lower, and it's a private thing. But I think that we need some coordination with the state in that sense, because there could be some stimulation. It can be through tax returns or some kind of incentives. You know, you cannot see solving the problem by one or the other. It has to be coordination. So I think that's more intelligent, and I don't think that is a big deal to set up, really.
It's not only market driven. You need to have the state coordinating some actions and some incentives and things like that. Dale, so globalization is forever.
And we are
Globalization
not
forever.
talking about billions of dollars. We are not talking about.
Yeah. Dale, globalization is forever. It's not irreversible. So it can decrease a little bit with onshoring of some manufacturing plants, or
I don't know if it's reshoring, but I think it's alternative shoring. So if you look at the last 10 years, maybe even 15, the number of disruptions have been substantial. Remember 2017, when certainly here in North America, we had so many hurricanes, Puerto Rico, Houston, there was another one somewhere, I forgot where it was, but we're seeing so many disruptions that are, and also then the trade war with China. So costs were already coming up in China. Then we had this dumb trade war, and really the trade war was dumb to me before this crisis. Now that we're in this crisis, it seems crazy dumb. But we've got all these disruptions, and so I don't know that a company like Cisco or Dell or Apple is going to say, let's bring manufacturing back to the U.S. You know, Apple kind of tried to do that with having Foxconn go to Wisconsin, because that's where Congressman Paul Ryan's district was. They picked his district. But really, that plan isn't going to be anything like what it was supposed to be at the beginning of Trump's administration because it's just too expensive. It doesn't make sense. So maybe you're not going to do it just in China, and you're going to be geographically diversified. Maybe you got stuff in Mexico, but maybe also you go to Eastern Europe, or you know, there's even a lot of people looking at Africa right now, different places in Africa. So we're going to see, because manufacturing is very mobile. Cesar and I are old. Maybe Cavanha, you are too. I don't know, but back in the 80s, Japan was a place you could put manufacturing. Nobody's going to put a manufacturing plant there unless they have to, unless it's very high end or autonomous or something. And what happened is that the companies.
I can't find the album Hannah Autonomous with something.
Oh, Alexa thought I was talking to her. Sorry. We were moving down this labor cost curve. China is already coming up. It's a big place. It's not totally replaceable, but we're going to look for other places in the world to find manufacturing capacity. You know, truthfully, I think Central America would be a good place because they don't have good infrastructure there, but they're really poor. Climate change has really hurt their primary agriculture economy. They're not part of South America. They're not really part of North America, and they need stuff. So I think there's going to be diversification in the U.S. differently than Brazil, probably. I don't think we're going to see a lot of reshoring. I just don't.
Yeah, that's right. Let's make a final round, final comment.
Are we almost done already? That was quick.
Yeah.
Zach,
Yes.
Yeah, sure. You wanted to make the final comment?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess that really what this has been, I think, is a catalyst to speed up a lot of processes that were already happening. So a lot of firms here were already looking at something called the China plus one strategy. Okay, we have our Chinese manufacturing, then let's build some resilience in the supply chain somewhere else. And I think this has sort of sped that up a little bit. And so really, I think we'll look back at this period and think we really, you know, whatever the trends were, we just jumped ahead 5 years or 10 years because we had to change so much more quickly because of the pandemic. I think, you know, we're moving towards more online, e-commerce. We're moving towards more Zoom kind of things. I think we're going to have less office buildings coming out of the other side of this. I think we're going to have leaner supply chains in some ways, but then also additional storage in other ways. And I think for the most part, what we're seeing is, you know, it's like we were kind of already going down the hill and then the slope just got much, much steeper because of the coronavirus. And so I think that, you know, we'll be able to get through it. And I do think supply chains are going to come out on the other side stronger and more resilient. I think it's going to be really painful to get there, but I think we're going to come out on the other side in better shape ultimately once the recovery is done.
Perfect. Stephen, your final comments, please.
Yeah, I'd just say that I 100% agree with Zach. And I think the consequence of that, too, is not only are supply chains going to come out more resilient and different, I think people's behavior purchasing-wise is going to come out crazy different and resilient. And I think, you know, the one thing I would say is that it's a system. So keep your behavior as normal as possible so that the system doesn't get jammed up and then downstream and upstream is all out of whack and then you can't buy toilet paper and you go on Facebook and you complain about it. That's my advice.
Very good.
Yeah, we've had to become way more self-sufficient. I'm like cooking stuff. I fixed a sink the other day, things I would never do, ever.
Cesar, your final comments?
Yeah, I think the new normal is going to be a different game altogether, for sure. And it's going to take longer than we expect. I think as a human, we are always hoping for the best. But reality is this pandemic is going to be around for a couple of years. And that means that we're going to have waves. In 1918, the second wave was the killer. So that's going to drive behavior. Hopefully, we are going to have some lessons learned, but we know that humanity has short memory. But this time, because it's going to take such a long time, I think the impact is going to be more permanent.
Thank you.
And for the better,
For the better.
because of frivolity, no, there's consumerism. This is going to change. We have to think twice about resources, about the family, how to be resilient, because it is about people, right? So I think we're going for the better, but it's going to be harder than we expect. It's going to take much longer time.
Excellent. Thank you. Dale, your final comments, please. You are our professor.
Well, so it's really interesting to me what had been happening leading up to this. So we had seen a move to nationalism, not just in the U.S. but definitely in Brazil with guys like Bolsonaro and Trump, and this really want to decouple and also at the same time, I think both in Brazil and the U.S., guys like Bolsonaro and Trump kind of anti-expert, anti-elite, anti-people like us, truthfully. And one of the things that this crisis has reminded us is we need smart people. We need people who know what to do in things like this. The U.S. has completely mishandled this crisis. It's really exposed the lack of leadership and a level of incompetence I think most of us that grew up in America are very surprised at. The other thing that it has really exposed is how much we need globalism and rely on globalization. We all of the ventilators are being made in China. Eventually, General Motors might make some, but it'll be after the crisis is over. So we are desperately intertwined, whether the people in politics like it or not. And you know, I'll try to make this quick, but growing up where I did in Michigan, you know, so many of the guys I grew up with who are now in their 60s are angry because of the disappearance of the automobile sector and all those jobs. And so they're the guys that voted for Trump when he said, we're going to deglobalize, we're going to bring all those jobs back home. That's not possible. It's never going to happen unless, you know, all of us in the U.S. get really, really poor. And then maybe it will be a low-cost manufacturing country, but that's not really what they want. And so this crisis has sort of highlighted some things that have been popular political thought in the last few years that really are clearly seen to be a sort of a charlatan kind of way of speaking. And my guess is, who knows, but my guess is that Bolsonaro and Trump won't necessarily last too much longer. That's what I think.
Excellent. We appreciate having Professors Dale Rogers, Zachary Rogers, Stephen Carnovale, and Cesar Lavalle with us today. Thank you very much, people. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fun.
It's always great.
Yeah, I'm always happy to wake up really early to come talk to you guys.
That's right. One of the things in this crisis is I don't know if I've ever worked as hard. So it was 6 o'clock in the morning when we started this. And, you know, most days, today actually I don't, but most days I have stuff scheduled all day starting at 7 or 6 or something.
I know, I'm so jealous of all those people just staying home and making bread and doing whatever they're doing.
That's good. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.